Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Crypto Chats. In honor of the month of October, I want to talk to you guys about another half cryptid, half urban legend type creature. I know last week I talked about chupacabras, which is another, if you watch the video, you know I'm incredibly unsure about how I feel when it comes down to determining what exactly they are. And I think I feel the same way about this topic of discussion as well. So today we're going to talk about melon heads. If you're not familiar with melon heads, they are these tiny humanoid creatures with big bulbous heads that eat people. Um, and before we go too far into talking about them, I want to get this part out of the way. So there is a medical condition called hydrocephalus, which is what a lot of the melon heads have been kind of diagnosed with. That's what a lot of people have determined is the reason why, they receive the name melon heads and why they look the way they do. And before we go super far, it's a very pretty rare but pretty serious condition. It basically makes your brain fill with water or liquid and kind of bumps out your brain. So just keep that in mind. It's kind of spooky. There's only, I think, fewer than 200,000 cases in the United States every year. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but that's a very serious thing and it's very scary. And I'm going to talk about it because it relates. But, just want to throw that part out there before we go too far into this. So, the Melon Heads legend started in 1949 in the United States, and it's still ongoing today. That's one of the aspects of the urban legend part of it is that it's still ongoing despite, lack of sightings, like lack of reported sightings, I'll say. And new information about them. That's definitely more of the urban legend aspect of it. But from 1949, a couple states across the United States have been experiencing these weird encounters with these small humanoid creatures. So we have Michigan, Ohio, Connecticut, just to name a few. Those are some of the biggest states that have these issues with these. Well, I don't want to say issues because I don't know that they're really going out of their way to wreak havoc. We'll get there. Anyway, so again, tell you the description again. They're tiny humanoid, almost look like children, childlike sized humanoid creatures with big bulbous heads that are cannibalistic in nature and will attack humans when provoked, I suppose. We'll get to that part, but yeah, so keep that in your mind. Here's a picture of them. They look like something straight out of an alien movie. But again, it's an actual serious medical condition, so keep that in your brains. All right, so first we're going to talk about the specific legend of where the melon heads came from in Michigan. So this one is, like I said, in Michigan. It's really kooky crazy, but I like it. So basically, the melon heads were said to have resided around a place called Felt Mansion in Michigan. At one point, part of the legend says that these were children who were in um, an asylum that was near Felt Mansion, who eventually broke out of this asylum because they had become feral and were just, they ran to the woods and got out of there. It was called Junction Insane Asylum. But what's interesting to me is that the Historical Society of this area of Michigan has no record of an insane asylum existing there. That's not to say that it didn't exist, because we all know how kooky crazy the early years of the United States were. But anyway, they do have a prison on record there, though, which, I don't know. Similar conditions? I don't know. What was it like in the 50s? I'm not sure. I wasn't alive. Anyway, so the melon heads, were supposedly released or broke out. Something. They were either let go or they left. It's not really super clear. But they got out anyway and were feral and fled to the woods to go and live there instead. It's said that they reside in the caverns that are around Felt Mansion. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know that I love the idea of a cave dwelling creature in general, especially little humanoid ones. I love it. It's creepy and weird, and I really am into it. So the Melon Heads are living in the caves, and that's a good place for them. Part of that legend from Michigan does also say that eventually these children, who these kids had hydrocephalus, and that's, I guess, the reason they were in the insane asylum. I don't know if that disease was like confirmed a disease then, and they maybe were just like, oh, you have weird heads, like we don't know what to do with you, we're going to put you in here. I don't know, I'm not sure. But anyway, these kids did have hydrocephalus, which is why their heads look the way they did. And after becoming feral, they were released, blah, blah, blah. We already went over that. So the legend states that shortly after fleeing this area and taking up residence in these caverns, these children and these melon heads went back to the asylum and murdered the doctor that was abusing them. So that's part of the legend here, is like part of the reason these kids ended up becoming feral is that they were being abused, which that makes sense to me. I watch a lot of episodes of Criminal Minds. I've seen what happens. I don't know if that's real life, but it is what it is. So another interesting part about the legend about the children killing the doctor that was abusing them is that they supposedly killed him in Felt Mansion. I don't know why he would have been there. I don't know if that's maybe where he lived. I'm not really sure. Anyway, you know, they supposedly killed him in Felt Mansion and then dismembered him and hid his body parts on the walls, which is, I mean, yeah, I guess. But so now, like, nowadays people will go to Felt Mansion and report, like, seeing apparitions of this doctor and, like, weird ghosts of small kids running around. So it's, like, supposedly pretty haunted from this happening with the Melon Heads, from, you know, the starting point of this legend, which is cool to me because I love that stuff. And to see, like, you know, an urban legend slash cryptid also turn into a paranormal happening is like, it's everything I dream of. So the next legend that I'm going to talk to you guys about is the one from Ohio, because this one is, they're all very similar, but this one is a little different. It has its own little aspects that are specific to this Ohio legend, and it's really cool and I like it. So we're going to talk about that one. So in this Ohio legend of the Melon Heads and the start for how they came to be, slightly different circumstances. We have a bunch of children who don't have hydrocephalus. That's a very important part. They don't have hydrocephalus at the beginning. Were orphaned and living at this orphanage, being cared for by a mysterious figure named Dr. Crow, who is also sometimes referred to in legend as Dr. Melonhead. And Dr. Crow was doing experiments on these children. He was, you know, really abusive, you know, not great to these poor orphaned children, and was running experiments on them to try to, I don't know what his end game was, honestly, but he was running experiments on these kids, which kind of he actually ended up giving them hydrocephalus by continuously injecting liquid into their brains. So they turned into these, you know, strange looking children with huge hairless heads, which is sad. That's pretty upsetting to me. I mean, they weren't fed supposedly, so they were really malnourished looking, so they had really skinny bodies and really big heads. But yeah, so it's, you know, they didn't have hydrocephalus before they met this mysterious doctor. And he gave them hydrocephalus and then let them loose. Well, no, he didn't let them loose because in this legend they actually kill him and then burn down the orphanage and flee into the woods, where they're said to eat babies. So, yeah. I don't know. I do kind of like the aspect of all of these melon heads being just straight up cannibals. I don't really know why I like it so much because I promise I have never eaten human meat. I don't eat meat at all. I would never eat human meat. I feel like I have to say that because I feel like me being interested in them being cannibals like seems like I'm a cannibal, but I'm not, I promise. Um, I just think it's like I'm trying to like I picture it in my head and they to me like melon heads definitely look like aliens. They look like the Hollywood portrayal of aliens, which I know they're not. I know they're just children with hydrocephalus, which is fine. But I mean that's not it's exaggerated, right? Because it's an urban legend, it's a weird cryptid, so it is exaggerated to the fullest extent. Um, so like, you know, in most cases, especially in modern day America, we would see a child with hydrocephalus and their head would not be the size of a watermelon. It might be a little large, but like not as exaggerated as the melon heads legend leads you to believe. You know? Does that make sense? Um, but I don't know. I think it's like I'm picturing it and like if you were just walking down the road one day and you like whoops you walked into melonhead territory and then like a whole gaggle of like small children with massive heads came at you and just started like eating your limbs. I think this is why there are so many horror movies based on the melon heads because they're kind of scary. And the fact that they eat people is scary. It's interesting and weird, but also scary. Anyway, so good for them. They killed that guy who gave them hydrocephalus and then continued to live their lives in the woods and eat babies. A hearty meal of babies. Alright, so now we're going to talk about Connecticut's version of this Melonhead legend. Connecticut actually has two different explanations. There are like two different legends that kind of made their way into one, and it's like not necessarily two different legends, but like two different starting points, like two different explanations for this legend. Um, the first one is like super similar to the rest of them. Like that's the common theme here with these melon heads and how they came to be. They were children with this disease who were either in an asylum or an orphanage and were treated badly and they fled. That's like the most common I don't know, retelling of this story. Because, like, keep in mind, too, that there are also legends of the Melonhead in other states in the United States. It's not just Michigan, Ohio, and Connecticut. Um, there are others. These are the three biggest ones. So, wanted to cover those. But, you know, I know that there's talk of them in North Carolina as well. It's just interesting because that's the common thread of, like, you know, the origin story for these creatures is pretty much all the same. So for the first explanation of them in Connecticut, it's that Fairfield County had an asylum that burned down in 1960. Everybody in this building died except for 10 to 20 patients. They weren't sure how many specifically got out. There were just 10 to 20 patients that were unaccounted for, and that, you know, their bodies weren't found in this fire. But like everybody from like patients to staff to doctors, like everyone else died in this fire. These 10 to 20 children, patients, I don't want to say children because I don't know for sure they were children. These 10 to 20 patients fled to the woods and escaped the fire and turned to cannibalism. And that's how they got hydrocephalus, which I don't think that's how that works. I could definitely be wrong, but I don't necessarily think. I didn't do that much research on hydrocephalus, I'm not gonna lie to you. But I don't think you can get it from just eating people. I don't really know. I'll look into it later and maybe I'll leave a comment for myself or you guys, I don't know. But that was how they ended up where they were. As they fled to the woods after, you know, surviving this fire and I don't know, 8 people. The second legend of how the Melon Head came to be in Connecticut is interesting to me because it's so different from the other ones that it's like, I don't know, I just think it's wicked cool. So the second one is that the Melon Heads were actually descendants of a colonial era family, the Shelton Trumbull family. And this family in, colonial times were accused of witchcraft. And they were forced into the wilderness, and as a factor of inbreeding and cannibalism over the years, since they were, shunned from the community for being supposed witches, they just turned into melon heads over all these years. Which I think that one's kind of interesting. Like, I think it's, like, obviously the other legends are cool too, but I think this one's, like, wicked cool because I don't know. I like witches. I like, I'm from New Hampshire, I'm from New England. We have a lot of really strong feelings about witches and this, Salem, Massachusetts and its witch trials. So I just like it, okay? Yeah, so that, like, part of the thing with them too is that, like, and this is, like, I think the thing that keeps it alive today is that, like, they're, like, ready and willing to attack anybody who trespasses, like, on what they perceive to be their land, which is fair because I know that if I was a cannibalistic, small humanoid creature with a giant head living in the woods, I would probably attack somebody for trespassing on my little slice of paradise. But so that's, like, I think what fuels this legend is that people are afraid they're going to be eaten, which is fair. That's makes sense. I'm afraid I don't want to be eaten by a person. But it's cool too because there's also a bunch of roads in Connecticut and different counties that are referred to as Dracula Drive, and they're supposedly, like, the home point for all of these melon heads. And, like, Dracula Drive as, like, an actual named street doesn't exist, but there's, like, I think the list had, like, 10 different streets in Connecticut that are all referred to as Dracula Drive just because, they're supposedly home to melon heads. As far as sightings go, like, the 1950s, like, had a whole, like, 10-year span where people were just constantly being like, oh, I saw this thing, I saw these weird glowing eyes, I saw this melon head, it was over there and it was over here. But that's, like, as far as it goes. And that's one of the other aspects of it being an urban legend rather than a cryptid. This is, like I said in the beginning, this is another one that I don't really know where I stand on it. I'm not, like, fully convinced either way. Kind of, again, like the chupacabra, I'm not, like, a lot of chupacabras were said to be a hoax, and then I feel like a lot of this, like, melon head stuff is, just people being rude to children with diseases they don't understand. So I don't really know. I don't know how I feel. There's such a huge lack of, like, reported sightings, which, like, I talk about this a lot. There's, a lot of people, like, see things, but don't want to talk about it in fear of, like, being, made the butt of the joke. Which I understand. I can get that. And I think this might be one of those things where people, like, don't, like, it's a common thing that people in these areas all talk about with each other. Like, oh yeah, I saw a melon head, like, 20 minutes ago walking down the street. But it's not really necessary to, like, report it. You know what I mean? If any of you watched Hellier, I know my very first video was about Kentucky goblins, and it was, mostly brought on because I had been watching Hellier. There's, they go down to Kentucky and they are talking to all of these people who live in this area where all of this weird stuff is supposedly happening, and they say, hey, so you seen anything weird lately? And all these people are like, oh, well, no, not really. And then they start talking, like, they're chatting along, and they're like, oh, well, actually, one time there was, like, an 8-foot UFO that just like blocked half of the town, and like, oh yeah, these little goblins that run around the mines all the time and like attack our kids and our dogs and stuff. It's like, you know, like sometimes like things like that don't register as like a, I don't know, something that's a necessity to report because it's such a like common occurrence. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's like kind of really all I have for you guys. The melon heads are one of those things that like I think will probably live forever because they're so spooky. Which is not to say that people with hydrocephalus are spooky because they are not, but the legend built up around the melon heads is what makes them that way. Um, yeah, I mean, weird stuff. Weird stuff happening all around. So with that, I will say goodbye to you all. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you enjoyed what I had to say, please like and subscribe. And check out my link tree down below because I have a bunch of other stuff I'm working on. You can find it all in one place down at the bottom. And yeah, so hope to see you guys next week. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!